Hello and welcome to the Sitecore Commerce 8 powered by Commerce Server quick installation video. The purpose of this video is to demonstrate a developer machine installation. Now this differs from a production installation of Sitecore Commerce powered by Commerce Server in two major respects. First of all, we're going to do a minimal security configuration. In a production instance, you're having to configure a number of roles and database access permissions specific to specific users and specific tasks within a installation. And the second is we're not going to configure Commerce Server staging. And Commerce Server staging is required for moving catalog and other data between a staging environment and a production environment. And that is required to be on different machines, and since this is a single server developer instance, you are unable to configure that, so we won't do that for this. A secondary purpose of this video is to demonstrate and understand how Sitecore and Commerce Server work together. So basically the different aspects of that integrated solution. So first off, the prerequisites for this installation are similar to the prerequisites for installing Sitecore itself. So namely, you should have a Windows machine that meets the minimum criteria, as well as having IIS enabled and SQL Server enabled. One thing I should note, a Mongo instance is also required for this installation, although you can install SQL Server without MongoDB due to the nature of the integrated solution and dependencies on XDB. Mongo is required for the installation. Now, the install process itself, for this installation, we're going to install Sitecore 8.0 Update 5, as well as Commerce Server 11 Update 1, and Commerce Connect, which is the middleware layer that is used by Sitecore for any external e-commerce system integration. Commerce Server Connect, which are additional pipelines and components that are layered on top of Commerce Connect that are specific to Commerce Server. We're also going to install the Merchandising Manager, and we're going to install the Solution Storefront, which consists of a number of things within a zip file. There's the Solution Storefront package itself, which has all the code and all the front-end code and a Visual Studio project for the Solution Storefront. There's images that are used by the example catalog, and there's database scripts that are used in order to populate options such as shipping options and profile options. So for step one, we're going to install Sitecore and Commerce Server, and you should ensure that XDB is up and running. And we're going to do a web config change within the registry in order to enable large web configs, which are necessary for that unified solution. And then after we install Sitecore, we're going to install Commerce Server, and then we'll configure Commerce Server and go through the rest of the installation tasks. So we'll go ahead and start that now. Okay, so we're on my virtual machine here, and we're going to run through very quickly looking at the dependencies for the installation. So first of all, we have Sitecore 8.0 Update 5, and we have the latest version of the Commerce Server installation here itself. We have Sitecore Commerce Connect, and we have Sitecore Commerce Server Connect. These are basically updates to the pipelines that Sitecore Commerce Connect uses. And we have the Merchandising Manager itself. That's a Speak application that we'll use to look at the products. And we have the Reference Storefront. And this is a zip file which contains a number of things. It has a number of database updates as well as packages for installing the Reference Storefront and installing the Commerce Server specific parts of the Reference Storefront. So the Reference Storefront can actually be used with the Commerce Server application as well as the Microsoft Dynamics AX for retail application. And last but not least, we have, of course, the license key that we need for that installation. So we're going to start here with Sitecore 8, and we'll run through that installation. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to install Sitecore 8 on SQL Server, and I'm going to create a user in SQL Server, basically make it a DBO admin, just call it Sitecore and Sitecore, and we're going to use that for the installation. A lot of the other things we're simply going to install as the admin user, and we're doing this again because this is a developer installation. We're trying to do this as quickly as possible just so that you can get to understand how Sitecore and Commerce Server work together. Security is one of the key things, and it's probably one of the most time-consuming aspects to do a proper, fully integrated, production or even non-prod developer instance of Commerce Server and Sitecore together. So we're basically minimizing that, and we're going to do this in the simplest fashion here. So we'll run through the Sitecore installation and install the complete program. Now this is indicating that the web client service is not available. That's not an issue for this. And I'm going to call this Commerce 8 and pick up that license file that we see here on my C drive. And you can see here that it's assigned to Sitecore, and we're going to pick the local server, and I already have that user Sitecore created, so we're going to use that account. Okay, so I'm using that local database and that user that I've created, and we're going to install Sitecore to the normal location within www root. Give it the same name of Commerce 8 for the website, and do that installation. So once Sitecore is finished installing, we'll come back and we'll run through some post-installation steps and then install Commerce Server itself. Okay, so the installation's completed, and we're going to launch Sitecore and take a look, make sure everything's good with the install. We'll take a look as well and make sure that XDB is up and running, and then we'll do a few post-installation steps to IIS in order to prepare the installation for Commerce Server. Okay, so we'll do the usual default login, which is admin and B, and we're not going to store that password. All right, so we're now able to log into Sitecore, and if we look at the content editor, you can see here that it's a default installation. We haven't installed Commerce Connect, we haven't installed any of the Commerce Server portions yet. All right, so there is our Sitecore instance, and that is now up and running. And next we'll take a look at RoboMongo, and we'll use this. You can either use RoboMongo or MongoView. All we're doing is we're simply connecting to our local connection, and we want to make sure that XDB is up and running. So we're going to connect to that, and we can see here that we have analytics and the tracking contact, tracking history, and tracking live. These are all we need for XDB, and that's done automatically. So again, this is an unsecured Mongo instance. It's simply listening on that Mongo default port of 27017, and when you install Sitecore, it's simply defaulting to localhost and that instance. And so that's how that connection is made, and you can see that in the Sitecore connection strings file. Again, like this installation and everything else we're just installing as admin, we're just installing without security. So this is something that for this demo we'll leave as is, but in production you definitely want to secure those XDB instances. Okay, so in preparation for the installation of Commerce Server, we're going to do a post-install step, and that is modifying a system setting in the registry in order to allow an increased web config size. Now, this is necessary for Sitecore powered by Commerce Server 8.0. It will not be necessary for 8.1, so this is one of the things that is done as part of the simplification process. And so we're going to launch regedit, and we will take a look at the setting HKLM software, Microsoft, iNet STP, and we can see here under configuration there is a dword entry of max web config file size in KB, and that is set to 500. So if you don't have that key configuration and that setting reg dword max web config file size in KB set to 500, you should do that. So again, this is part of those installation steps, and it's relatively easy to copy paste that and configure that. So now that we have that post-installation step done, Sitecore is installed, and we can now go through and install Commerce Server. Okay, so now that we have Sitecore installed and that post-installation step, we'll go ahead and go back to our prerequisite downloads, and this is the latest version of Commerce Server, and we will launch that, and we'll run through the installation process. So this is the installer here, fairly simple. Click on the install, accept the license agreement, and continue. Okay, so the install took a few minutes and basically completed without errors. And now at this point, what it does is it pops up the Commerce Server configuration wizard. And you can run through this now, or you can launch this manually. Let's choose to run through this now. And so what we're going to do is basically create a new database within SQL Server. We're going to use Windows authentication, so we're basically logging in as the current admin user, which I'm installing as, and it's that user that will have access to that database. I've put in the administrator password for staging. Now, we're not using Commerce Server staging here. However, you do have to configure a staging service account for this install. So we'll do this. As I mentioned earlier, this is a developer installation locally. It is very insecure, and Commerce Server is prompting you to indicate for your information that this is very insecure. So you do not run using an admin account in production, but we will for this installation here. So it's going to set up a number of things within Commerce Server and going to create that administration and add a number of features, and we'll come back to this when it completes those tasks. Okay, so Commerce Server has completed that configuration, and so we'll hit finish. And you can see here now that the installation is complete and the configuration is complete. So we'll just hit exit. Now what we're going to do is, as a post-installation step, set up some directories for IIS for the Commerce Server services. And these are necessary for the business tool application. So the catalog manager, order manager, profile manager, all of those things use web services to communicate with the Commerce Server databases. And so we'll set those up now. Okay, so I'm going to go to inetpub and create a new folder called CS Services. And then at this point, I'm going to launch the IIS Manager and create a new site and point it to that CS services directory. And the host name as well, I will set to CS services. And then within that, I also need to modify the host file. So I'm going to go to Windows System 32, drivers, etc hosts, and modify that in Notepad to add that CS services directory. And that is all we need for that step. So for our next task, we're going to actually install the Commerce Server site. Now, one thing I should note that like Sitecore, which can have a number of sites within a single instance, Commerce Server can have a number of sites within a single instance as well. However, I should note that a Commerce Server site has to be tied to a Sitecore site. So there is a one-to-one relationship between Commerce Server sites and Sitecore sites. So as part of our tasks, first of all, we're going to unpack this Commerce Server site, and that's really a process that will install the site itself and a number of the services that we can then use. Next, we're going to do a number of post-install steps, so that includes setting permissions correctly within app pools and the authorization manager. And then the last step is once we have those tools enabled, we're going to import some catalogs and import some database schema changes that are necessary for using that with the Solution Storefront site. So next we're going to go and install the Commerce Server site itself. And Commerce Server has a rather interesting way of packaging up sites. There's this program and process known as pupping or unpupping. And in this case here, if you go into your installation files and that Sitecore reference storefront zip file, which we've extracted, underneath Sitecore powered by Commerce Server and database, there's a directory called pup, and that contains this pup file. And if you double click on that, that will launch the unpackaging utility within Commerce Server, and we can run through that installation process of doing a quick unpack. And I'm keeping within the documentation here, so I am going to rename this to CS Solution Storefront Site and pick that IIS website CS Services, which you created earlier. Using Windows Integrated Security is good enough. And this packager, or in this case unpackage process, will continue, and then we'll come back to this when it's finished completing those tasks. Now, midway through that installation procedure, you will get this prompt for basically schema definitions for profiles and other aspects. You can just accept those defaults and similarly accept the defaults for the profiling system, connection string, and the default for the schema definition. So we'll hit OK, and it will continue running through that installation process. Okay, so the last thing it does is, again, gives us notification about site permission access. Now, one of the things that we're going to be doing is using Authorization Manager, which is essentially an extra step for security reasons that allows us to assign a particular account to have access to the particular service and particular database installation. Now again, because this is just a developer instance, we still need to run through the process, but we're going to give those permissions to the administrator account. So we'll say OK to this prompt, and we can see here now that a number of databases were created and a number of IIS applications were created. So if we look in IIS now and refresh this, you should be able to see that we have those additional solution storefront instances created. Now, why did we have to run through that configuration post that Commerce Server installation? The main reason is, like Sitecore, Commerce Server can install a number of instances on the same machine. So what we've done is really two things. We've installed Commerce Server itself, and then we've installed a site to Commerce Server, and that happens to be the CS Solution Storefront site here. And in turn, we have those IIS directories mapped to those various services within Commerce Server. So now that we have that site installed, we now need to run through a number of post-installation steps in order to add authentication so that these services and other aspects can be called successfully. Okay, so first things first. Now, if we go back to our site here, you can see that Commerce Server has created a number of services. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to create a number of application pools, one for each service. So first things first, I have my catalog web service app pool, and I'm going to go to the advanced settings, and I'm going to change the application pool identity to the administrator account. And once you've done that, if you go to the catalog web service and look at authentication here, make sure that anonymous authentication is disabled. Make sure Windows authentication is enabled. And sometimes if you have issues here, move the NTLM provider up above the negotiation provider. And that's it. So you need to do that. Oh, and the last thing here is assign the application pool to the that site. So here under advanced settings, we now select the catalog web service application pool. And so we need to do that 4 times, once for each one of the services that are established here. And that's the first step. And then the next step is to use the ASMAN, the authorization manager, in order to ensure that the administrator has access to XML configuration files that are necessary for this web service. So I'm going to do that 4 times. I'm not going to go through that step in the video here. Just suffice to say that I'm going to add those 4 app pools and assign those app pools to those 4 web services individually. Okay, so now that we have those app pools set up correctly, you can see here I have the 4 app pools. They're all set to administrator as the user, and they're now each running those respective web services there. So next step is to use the authorization manager. So just going to type asman.msc, and what that will do is launch the authorization manager. Now what we'll do here is we'll open an authorization store, and this happens to be an XML file, and that XML file is located within the web services that we just set up. So if we go to our catalog web service here, you can see we have a catalog authorization store. So we will open that up and go down to our role assignments, and you can see here that we have an administrator, and we're going to assign users from Windows, and we will correct my spelling error, administrator. That is correct, and we'll assign that to the catalog administrator as well. So we do this for the catalog authorization store. We do this for the marketing authorization store. In fact, we do this 4 times. Again, once for each one of those services that are running. So we go to Marketing Administrator, and we will add that administrator user again. Same thing, make sure you spell it correctly. And the orders authorization store. And last but not least, the profiles authorization store. Now at this point, you should be able to launch the business tools. So the product manager, the customer and orders manager. Now the customer and orders manager by default runs as HTTPS. Obviously, if you're looking at orders, there's personally identifiable and sensitive information there, and so by default Commerce Server makes you run that as HTTPS. What we're going to do is there's a config file, we can disable that, although alternatively, and of course in a production environment, if you are using that web service, you do want to secure that and set up HTTPS authentication, and there is instructions how to do that. But in our case, we're just simply going to disable HTTPS. And so we'll make sure that we have, last but not least, the profile administrator here. And so that is it for the authorization manager. Now let's go test those web services and then launch those business tools. Okay, so I'm in IIS and I've gone to the content view here, and I have my ASMX web service, and I'm going to hit browse, and you can see here that we're being prompted for authentication. Now if you're running on a virtual machine, this is a known issue, so we have to go through a registry fix. Otherwise, if you're not running on a virtual machine, you should see the web service and be able to access the methods there, and at that point launch the business tools. But since I am, and since a lot of people are, I know for this type of installation, we're going to go through the steps to do a registry fix in order to make VMs work with IIS authentication. So we're going to go back to regedit here. And we're going to go to HTLM system, current control set, control LSA, and MSV 10, and we're going to make a new multi-string value and call it back connection host names. And at this point here, we will put in CS services into that registry entry. And just ignore the error message. It's basically from extra line formatting. And at that point, we should now be able to test this service and see all of our methods. There you go. So that's good. And at this point here, we can go through and continue with some of the catalog steps. The moment that we get to the order manager, at that point we'll need to go in and do a registry change in order to disable HTTPS authentication, which is enabled by default. Okay, so we're going to use the catalog manager to import some content here. So we'll type catalog manager, and you can see here there's two applications. One is the catalog manager itself. The other is the catalog and inventory schema manager. And that is very much like the template manager, but for Commerce Server. You're actually doing very similar operations. Now in this case here, we're not going to be doing any template modifications. We're just simply going to launch the catalog manager, and you can see here that it's prompting us to say the web service is currently unavailable. And that's okay. We're going to edit that, and we're going to copy our web service here. And you can see here that we have our host name is different, our solution storefront web service name is different, and so that's okay. And we're going to hit edit, and we're going to paste in that value and say okay, and okay, and at this point it should be connecting over the web service. And we can see here that we have our tasks, and we're going to import a catalog. And we're going to browse to, again, our installed files and our storefront. And under database catalog, there is our catalog XML file, and we're going to say open. And we're going to do a replace. We're going to replace everything in the catalog. Now there is nothing in there, so it's not that scary an operation, but we'll go ahead and do that and hit create. And at this point, we've imported all that catalog information. If we see refresh, we can now see that we've imported all of that catalog data that we're going to use for our AdventureWorks example site. Now, next thing is back to tasks. We're going to import a inventory catalog. So we'll click on inventory catalogs and click import, and the exact same operation, but instead of importing the product catalog, we're going to import the inventory, and we'll say replace and next, and do the exact same operation. And so this is basically imported the inventory data that is associated with that product catalog. And you can see it here as well. And you can refresh, and we now have our AdventureWorks inventory. Okay, our next step is to run a couple commands within SQL Server. So I'm going to launch the SQL Server Management Studio. And at this point, there are a number of scripts that we're going to run. We're going to run a profile schema update script, as well as a script that will add a number of shipping and payment methods which will be used by the solution storefront. So I'm going to connect. I'm going to select open. And again, back to that solution storefront examples in the install files. If we go to database and profiles, there's the SQL script here, adjust schema, and we will open that. And we'll select the database that this needs to run against, which is the profiles database. And we're going to remove this first line within the script and click execute. And that command completed successfully. And we're going to do this again for a couple more things here. So we'll go to database and orders, and we'll open up payment method. And again, remove that first line. And we're going to execute this against the transaction config database instead. And we'll say execute. We can see that our rows are affected, so that ran successfully. And last, our shipping methods, same thing, comment out these or remove that first line, and it's executing against the same database. So click execute, and that adds those rows successfully. Okay, so at this point, Sitecore is installed standalone, and Commerce Server is installed standalone, and we've actually added a site to Commerce Server, and within that site we've set up the web services, and we've added a number of products, and we've added a number of inventory statuses within that site. So now what we're going to do is we're going to install all the bits that are necessary to get the unified Sitecore powered by Commerce Server solution. So what we're going to do is we're going to close all of this, and we're going to fire up Sitecore, and we're going to install a number of packages and a number of update packages. Okay, so for our next step, we're going to start installing the components which are necessary to bring through that unified solution. So we're going to start bringing that Sitecore installation and that Commerce Server installation together. So first off, we're going to install Commerce Connect, which is that base e-commerce framework. And then we're going to install the bits on top of that that are specific to Commerce Server. And then lastly, we're going to install the merchandising manager and the reference storefront. So once we get that solution starting to tie together, then we'll install that example implementation, and then we'll finish that up, and that'll lead us towards the end of this install. So first things first, we're going to go to the control panel and install a package. And we're going to upload and install Sitecore Commerce Connect. Now, Commerce Connect is really Sitecore's middleware layer that's used for pretty much any modern day commerce integration. That's both for Commerce Server, that's also true for Microsoft Dynamics AX for retail, and also a number of partners have used it to develop third-party integrations. And what it does is it really has a number of pipelines for pretty much every commerce operation that you would go through. And there's a lot of nice and useful hooks like product synchronization, engagement plans for things like cart abandonment, and it's just a really nice framework to build upon. And so like anything, and it actually does predate the integration with Commerce Server itself. So it's a pretty useful framework to use, and we're installing that first because everything else is layered upon that. After we install Commerce Connect, there's Commerce Server specific pipelines that we install, and then we install the reference storefront, which in turn also lives on top of Commerce Connect and those Commerce Server additions. So we're going to go and upload that and install Commerce Connect. And once that's done, we'll accept the terms of the license agreement. And after that, we'll install the Commerce Server Connect bits on top. And next, and install. All right, so that install is completed. Now it does take a few minutes. We've skipped this for this video, but be patient. If you don't have Mongo running, and we did ensure that we had that at the start of this video, if you don't have Mongo running, the install will take a very, very, very long time. So ensure that that's running when you install that package, but it does take about 5 to 10 minutes depending upon your system. So we will go ahead and we will restart Sitecore. And at this point here, we are going to run the update installation wizard. And for those of you who don't know what the update installation wizard is, it's really a variation on the Sitecore packaging system. It runs a little bit differently, and there's a few things that it can do that packages can't, including some post-installation steps. And so some of the bits that we do want to install here, such as Commerce Server Connect, do have post-installation steps. And so we're going to look at the package, and we can take a look at, again, the license key. And first thing, you can analyze the package for potential installation conflicts. This is really useful for looking at existing installations and potentially troubleshooting conflicts. Now in our case here, this is basically a new install, and again, for the purposes of this video, we've done run through this a few times, so we know what we're installing. We can run through that, and we can actually see this as we're installing that package. So once we get to the end, we now have a few more update packages to install after we run those post-installation steps. Okay, so we've now completed the Commerce Server Connect, and you can take a look at the installation results in the details. And then next we're going to install the merchandising manager. And same procedure. We can look at the README, and we have the choices to analyze and to install the package. In this case here, we're going to install the package immediately, and once again look at the results. And then at that point, we're going to install the Solution Storefront MVC site. Okay, so the Merchandising Manager has installed, and again, we can take a look at the results for that, but in this case, it's a fairly new install, and the only problems were potential problems. Once more, so now we're going to install the reference storefront, and again, this is an MVC based site. It's really a good example implementation built on top of Commerce Connect, and there's two packages to install, and the reason is one is a common code base that is used by both Microsoft Dynamics AX retail integration, and the other is used for Commerce Server. And so we're going to install the common package first, and then we're going to install the Solution Storefront examples for Commerce Server. So we'll go to install another package. We'll go to browse. Once again, this is in that reference storefront. And we can see here, if we go to packages, we have two update packages, common and then powered by Commerce Server. So we'll first go to common and we'll install that. Look at the README and click install. Okay, so that is finally completed. So we can look at the installation result. Again, same thing. We'll see some minor conflicts. And we're going to install the Commerce Server specific bits to the reference storefront now. So again, look at the package information, the README, analyze and install that package immediately. Okay, so that last package is complete. Now we have one more package to install, and for that we have to go back to Sitecore. We're just using the regular package installation and not the update manager, and that's really just a package containing all the image files that are used for the example content that we have. And so we'll log into Sitecore and launch the installation wizard and install that last package. Okay, so we're now back in Sitecore, and we'll go back to the control panel and install a package. And this will launch the installation wizard, and we will select the next package. Again, we'll upload that, and this is coming from the zip file that had all of the Sitecore reference storefront examples and all of those packages within there. So we'll select the AdventureWorks images, and we will upload those. Those will take just a couple seconds. It's basically uploading all the media assets for all of that content. And that is it. And similarly, we will install that package. And once again, that's finished, and we will close that. Now the next step is for us to merge the web config entries, and there's two ways of doing this. First of all, you can do a manual merge, and we're actually going to go through that process within this video. However, there are a number of automation scripts that you can use. My colleague Kelly Hurd has blogged about this, and I'll have a link to that within this YouTube video. But for our process, we're going to manually merge that so that you can understand what's happening, and also, if you do happen to use the automation scripts and they don't work, this at least lets you understand what's going on in the background. Okay, so step one, we basically go to our Sitecore site and we open up the web config in the website directory there. And step two is we're going to open up two files within this merge files directory. We have merge.commerceserver and we have merge.commerce.storefront, and so we're going to open those up as well. And basically what you do is, in order, go to each of these sections, and you can see here that the web config sections match up fairly closely with the web config of Sitecore application, obviously. And what you're doing is you're basically copying settings from these two files back into the original Sitecore web config. Now, the difficulty and where this becomes very tricky is you can't just simply copy this and dump it right to the end of the web config. You need to go through and for a lot of these, actually make sure that you're pasting these entries into the right place. So for example, here we're in configuration, config sections, and we have a new section and a new section group. And we're going to copy these, but leave the rest and place that into this config sections section. And through this method, you basically go through all of the settings here within the merge.commerce server config, and then in turn go through the settings in merge.commerce.storefront.config. Now, one of the things that you'll see here is that there's a fair bit of replication between merge.commerceserver.config and merge.commerce.storefront.config. Now, even though we're seeing this here twice, your task is not to copy those there twice. Your task is to see if this already exists, then simply ignore that from this copy paste step. And so that's basically the task. And so as we go through each of these entries, we basically copy the additional content from here into the web config and save this when this is done. And you should see Sitecore load back up. Now, if you don't, let's say, for example, we have duplicated a specific setting. Upon restarting Sitecore, you'd get basically a .NET error indicating a duplicate web config entry. And so the web config does have a DTD that it's adhering to, and so that way it's making sure that there aren't those duplicate entries. And so that's basically the idea of doing this merge operation, is to take these two files and merge those contents back into that Sitecore web config, which is a fairly large file. And again, that was why we did that initial task of changing the IS config settings in order to allow us to have a web config that was potentially larger than 500 kilobytes. And so we're going to be doing that, and then back to, I'm not going to go through all the steps because it's a very time-consuming process. Basically just wanted to outline a couple of the red flags, which is to say, you know, you do need to actually go through and ensure that you're copying and pasting from the right location in your source files into the right location of your destination files, and then also not duplicating those entries, even if you are seeing it twice, once in the commerce server config and once in the commerce storefront config. It's basically that it's necessary for this, but occasionally you will see duplicates as well, and so that's why you will see it twice, but you only want one copy in the Sitecore web config. So after you do those web config changes, there are a few post-install steps. The first is around profile encryption keys. We need to set those correctly in the registry as well as in our web config reference to that registry. And then you do a full republish, and you also do a reindex. But first things first, we're going to fix a bit of a permissions issue that came from app pool configuration that we need to address. Okay, so we've done all those web config changes, and we're going to load up Sitecore here, and this is actually a good error message. If we were getting an error message indicating that it couldn't read from the web config, that would be different, and we'd have to go back and change and find those duplicate entries. In this case here, what this means is that it's trying to use the network service account to talk to the database. And in this case, these are the commerce databases that it's trying to access. And so basically you can see here it's the commerce server administration database for that particular commerce server site that we're trying to access. And it's a very quick fix, and it's similar to what we had done earlier in IIS. And basically when we had gone through and set those application pools to have that administrator user for those commerce server applications, we're going to do the same for that Sitecore Commerce 8 app pool here. So we can see that network service account is what it's trying to access that database. And so we'll go to the advanced settings, and we'll change this to be the administration user or administrator user. And at this point, that should now fix that error. So our next step is to configure the profile encryption keys. Now, if you don't do this step and you try to launch the application at this point, you'll see that it's trying to find registry entries that do not exist. And so what we're going to do now is run through a couple steps that create the profile encryption keys, as well as adding the references to those in the registry. And then lastly, making any changes necessary to the web config to read from that registry value. So first off, we're going to go and launch the Commerce Server Tools command prompt. And now that we have this here, we're going to launch the Profile Key Manager application. And we're going to add this to the portion of the registry necessary for a 32-bit operation. And we'll do that again for the 64-bit operation. Now, last step is to check the web.config and make sure that our profile key value for the registry lookup matches our storefront name and the registry entries that we've just set. And so we're looking for these values here, and we want to make sure that our value for CS Solution Storefront site was the same as the CS Solution Storefront site here that we had set in the registry. So if we went to the registry entry, HKLM software, etc., you would see that name there. And so that does match. And so at that point, the registry entries are created and our web config entries match the registry keys. And so we can refresh this and we should be able to load Sitecore now at this point. So as part of our testing, we're going to do three things. First of all, we're going to ensure that we can see our Commerce Server catalogs within Sitecore. And then second of all, we're going to view the site itself. And then lastly, we're going to test the cart and buy functionality. Now, in order to do this, the reference storefront by default forces you to go to HTTPS for any cart operations because that's obviously a good security practice. So there are two ways to deal with that. You can either disable HTTPS in the code, and there are instructions how to do this in the reference storefront documentation, or we can enable SSL and IIS. And so we're going to do the latter. It's a slightly easier task and doesn't require a recompile. However, since this is a local developer machine and we're self-signing a certificate, you do get a certificate error. But that's fine for the purposes of testing and ensuring that we can flow from start to finish. And then last, we're going to look in the order manager to ensure that we have that order registered and accessible. Okay, so we're going to log in now and go to the content editor, and you should now see that you have your commerce nodes and catalog management and the AdventureWorks catalog that we loaded through a number of steps. We loaded the products themselves using the catalog manager. We loaded the inventory using the catalog manager as well, and then we did a package that loaded all of the images into the Sitecore Media Library. And you can see all of that content here now. And so there's a couple post-installation steps. The first is to publish all the content to the web database, and then the second is to index all the content, and that includes all indexes. So first things first, we'll go to publish and publish site. and republish everything and all languages. And that is a rather time-consuming process. So again, we're not going to wait to the end of this, and of course you need to do that anytime you're setting up an initial site. And then the second step is for us to go back into the Administration Center and look at the Indexing Manager and re-index all content. All right, so we've just published almost 27,000 files, so that takes a little bit of time. And the next step is to go to the Control Panel and look at the Indexing Manager, and we will select all the indexes and rebuild all of those. As with publishing, you can see the status of the rebuilding operation as it's progressing, and then once we finish that, we'll go and take a look at the storefront application itself. Okay, so those indexes have now been rebuilt, and so we'll say close, and we'll go back to the content tree and we'll take a look at that storefront application. Okay, so we need to do a few things here now. I'm just going to clean up my desktop, and the first thing is we're going to take a look at that storefront site and go to publish, and we'll see a bit of an error here, and that's due to a small change between master config and web config. What we need to do is copy some of the code from Vue's storefront to Vue's website. So we'll do that right now. So we have storefront here, and just simply copy and paste and rename that to website, and you should be able to refresh this and now see some of that storefront content. So that's the first step. Second step is to take a look at the config file for that storefront and add the appropriate entry to our hosts. So if we look here at reference storefront.config, we can see here that we have a host name cs.reference.storefront.com, and to do that we need to add a binding with the same host name to our site in IIS, as well as adding a hosts entry in our host file for that csreference.storefront.com. Now at this point here, you should be able to access that URL as well as log into Sitecore with that URL. And you can see here that we have all of that content that is coming from Sitecore and the commerce server, as well as all of the imagery in effect here. And so we can do some additional operations. We can add this to the cart, and you can see here now that when we go to checkout, this is going to be going to an HTTPS reference, or it's going to be trying to go to an HTTPS reference that doesn't exist. And so in the end, it is actually easier to set up HTTPS on a local machine. You can remove the HTTPS implementation, and there is documentation in the reference storefront as to how to do that, but it does require changing a number of variables and doing an application recompile. And in this case, through self-signing, it's easier to set up HTTPS. So we're going to go ahead and do that right now. So in IIS, if we go back to our base configuration here, we're not within any of the sites, we're on the overall IIS application, that's our machine name. If you click on server certificates, and we will go ahead and we will create a self-signed certificate and provide that friendly name. We're going to store that in our personal certificate store. And then what we're going to do is go to our Commerce 8 application, and we're going to add a new binding, and that's going to be HTTPS, and it's going to be the same host name, and we're going to pick that reference store and say OK and close that. And then at this point now we should be able to go back to our checkout process and have an HTTPS application that is accessing all the secure bits that are needed for doing those commerce activities that obviously require security. Now, because this is a self-signed certificate, it does give you an error. It's because our domain name is not matching up with our machine name. You can either ignore and continue, or this other solution is add a host name that matches your machine name. Therefore, when your certificate is generated, the host name and the machine name match up. But in this case, we're just going to say continue, and that way we can at least see that in fact the HTTPS is working as appropriate, and of course the security is applying as well there. So we can now get to those next steps, and we can see that we do have that certificate error, but we can continue further along into the application, so we can see different. And so as we go through this, we can now see that we are having our shipping options, and these are actually being pulled from Commerce Server. If we look in our order configuration and look in our Commerce Server databases, those shipping options are coming from there. And you can continue to billing, and you can fill out an order, and it will actually take this and it will write that order into the order database. And so let's do that actually as a test. I'm going to use my same shipping address, which is all just tests. And continue to confirmation, and at this point confirm that order. Perfect. And so now if we actually want to see that order in play, we'll go to the Commerce Server Customer and Orders Manager. And you can see here that the catalog web service by default allows HTTP because it's not considered secure or data, personally identifiable data that needs to be secured. However, the orders web service and the profile web service is. And so what we're going to do is we're going to enable it to allow HTTP on that entry. And so the configuration file for this is under Program Files x86, Commerce Server Business User Applications, and I'm going to Customer and Orders Manager .exe.config, and within that there's this entry here, allow HTTP, and we're going to set that to true first of all. And then now if we go back to the application here, we need to basically go to our different services and ensure that we have the correct URL for that service. So if we go to the catalog web service, for example, and go to that content view and browse to that, and we're going to have to copy those three entries as necessary, one for each one of the services here. So here's our catalog web service. We can take that URL, and that's going to go into the first line here. And then for the next, we'll do CS services for the orders web service. And then last for the profile web service. And at that point, we should be able to say OK. And now we have our URL updated. And if we click OK, this should launch the order manager. Okay, so we can see it has launched the order manager. And now if you want to find an order, the quickest way is to use a filter, but in this case here we'll just click find, and you can see our order there. And we can double click to access that, and we can see what was purchased, as well as a lot of the additional information that was passed to that order. So payments, discounts and promo codes, shipments, etc., all of that information is there in the order that can be accessed through the orders web service. So that concludes the installation of the Sitecore Commerce powered by Commerce Server solution storefront examples. Now from this point there are a number of things that you can do, a number of resources that you can look at. So first and foremost, there's the solution storefront code and documentation that's available on GitHub, and there'll be a link to that in the description of this YouTube video. Second, there's a little bit more information on Commerce Connect and understanding pipelines. So there's a Commerce Connect video series as well that you can look at. You can explore a bit more about XDB personalization, and that's probably best done by installing the Commerce demo package. My colleague Kelly Hurd has put a lot of effort into adding specific interesting e-commerce functionality on top of the reference storefront. So there are examples around discounts and promotions, personalization, typical cart activities such as merging carts. So for example, if you come in as an anonymous user and add some information to the shopping cart, and then you decide that you want to log in later, then you can merge that cart and check out under your logged in user. And there's a lot of other little tweaks like that that were added in specifically around demo scenarios, but you know, things that look good in demo obviously are very useful in the real world as well. So those have been released on GitHub, and again, like the solution storefront documentation and other videos, I'll provide a link to that in our description in this video on YouTube.